My name is Grayson Monroe, and I live in a quiet cul-de-sac in Cary, North Carolina, where the houses sit like rows of sentinels guarding secrets we'd rather forget. 6 years ago, my wife Delilah walked out, her heels clicking down the driveway in precise rhythm with my heart shattering, and nothing has been the same since. I traded wedding rings for chain-link fences, shared dreams for mortgage payments, and every morning I wake to the echo of her absence. Our son Malik keeps my world spinning, his brilliance and kindness a constant reminder that love, once planted, can grow again, even when its roots lie trampled in old wounds. That summer morning, the air hung heavy with humidity, and the scent of freshly mown grass drifted in from Malik's labor across the street. At 17, he volunteered to mow his grandparents' lawn out of courtesy, though he'd inherited neither their wealth nor their generosity. I watched from my porch as he guided the mower across the emerald expanse, each pass laying down stripes of hope. Droplets of sweat traced lines down his temples, but his jaw never wavered. He had the look of someone determined to do what was right, even when right was taken from him. Then came the knock, sharp, insistent, a puncture in the hum of the neighborhood. Malik paused, dragging one hand through his hair before setting the mower aside. I heard his footsteps crunch over gravel, the soft creak of the screen door as he opened it. When I stood and crossed the street, I saw her standing there, Cora Langford, my ex-mother-in-law, her posture rigid as a statue, lips pursed. She wore a pastel blouse embroidered with roses, as if to mock the heat. In her hand, a faded photograph fluttered like a warning flag. "Is Malik here?" she asked, voice brittle. He stepped forward, folder in hand. I approached silently, each footfall heavy with premonition. "Hello, Mrs. Langford," Malik said, his tone polite but cautious. He held out the folder college recommendation forms he'd printed himself. His best smile was ready, and I felt a swell of pride so fierce it made my chest ache. She snatched the folder as though it were poison. "I don't know why you people always want something from us," she snapped, her eyes flicking to me as though I were a guilty accomplice. "You're not my real grandson." Her words landed like stones in Malik's chest. I watched his spine curve under their weight, his fingers tightening around the folder until the paper crumpled. Time slowed. I wanted to step in, to knock her onto the pavement and reclaim my son's dignity with my fists, but I stayed rooted in place. Instead, I took a breath and let the moment unravel in its entirety. The sound of Cora's clipped vowels, the way Malik's shoulders trembled, the distant hum of cicadas hiding behind oak leaves. Once she turned and stalked off, heels clicking their own cruel rhythm, Malik remained still. I walked to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling the heat radiate from his skin. He didn't look up. I guided him back across the lawn to the porch swing where his mother and I once sat, sharing sweet tea and softer words. I sensed the ghosts of our family, the joyous birthdays, the holiday dinners, the day Malik was born, haunting each wooden slab beneath us. They reminded me how fragile our lives become when old grievances claim more space than forgiveness. I cleared my throat. "You did nothing wrong," I said, voice low so only he could hear. His eyes flicked to mine, dark pools reflecting betrayal. "Sometimes people say awful things because they are afraid of change, afraid of you." He inhaled, then exhaled a shaky breath, folding the crushed folder against his chest. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a fresh set of forms I'd printed earlier, along with a fresh pen. "Let's get this done right. Together." As he filled in the blanks, number by number, I studied him, his earnest brow, the way his tongue peeked between teeth when he concentrated, the quick assurance of his handwriting. I thought of the boy he'd been, cautious and clever, hiding behind encyclopedias and comic books, and the young man he was becoming, bold, compassionate, unbowed by cruelty. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant promise of rain, and I let myself believe that healing could begin here, in the shadow of old ghosts. When he finished, he closed the folder gently and slipped it into his backpack. He looked up, and for a moment our eyes locked. He saw my pride, my regret, and the fierce love that drove me to stand still when I wanted to move mountains. "Thank you," he whispered, voice barely audible over the whispering leaves. "For being here." I nodded, swallowing hard, and squeezed his hand. The cicadas fell silent, as if granting us a moment of peace before the world returned to its business. We walked back to my house side by side, footsteps echoing on the pavement. I carried the mower across the driveway, and he slung his backpack over his shoulder, the folder tucked safely inside. As I set the mower by the garage, I realized that sometimes the hardest battles happen in silence, and the strongest victories are won in quiet solidarity. That day, beneath the relentless Carolina sun, I vowed that no ghost from our past would ever cast a shadow over my son again. And as the sun dipped low, painting the grass gold, I knew I would keep that promise, even if it meant confronting every lingering phantom of old hurts. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds and splinters, painting rectangles of gold across the hardwood floor. I found Malik at the kitchen table, his best college application form spread before him like a battlefield. He sat rigid, his back too straight for a teenager, more soldier than son. The folder Cora had snatched yesterday lay beside him, its edges still crumpled. He stared down at it as though its creases held the weight of her words, and I felt a hollow ache in my chest. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, strong, dark, and bitter, and placed one in front of him without a word. He lifted his eyes, wary, but focused back on the forms without speaking. When I sat, the silence between us stretched and threatened to choke the room. Finally, Malik closed the folder and looked up. His eyes, always so assured, flickered with a crack of hurt. She said it again. "Dad," he whispered, voice tight. "At the front desk. You people always want something. You're not my real grandson." I felt the familiar coil of anger twist inside me, but before it could snap free, I swallowed it down. I reached across and placed my hand over his, warm and steady. "I'm sorry," I said, tone low. "She has no right to say that to you." He nodded once, a brief, brittle motion, and returned to his work. By noon, an email landed in our inbox, formal, impersonal, dripping with accusation. Cora Langford had filed a complaint with the Homeowners Association, claiming that Malik had harassed her and made her feel unsafe on her own property. I read the words twice, each sentence sharpening my teeth. I watched Malik's reflection in his laptop screen, his profile haunted, jaw clenched. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like a warning buoy. I closed the computer softly and stood. "Come with me," I said. He rose, folding the forms like a soldier stowing his gear, and followed me out the back door. We walked in silence to the car, the heat pressing against our skin like damp cloth. I opened the glove compartment and retrieved a black binder I'd prepared the night before. Evidence of every visit, every text message, every moment Malik spent mowing and watering and showing courtesy. "We're going to give them the truth," I said, voice firm. He placed his hand on my shoulder while I drove us to the HOA office, sunlight glinting off the dashboard. In the rearview mirror, I saw his eyes, filled with a mix of resolve and trepidation. He was 19 years old and all but birthright, facing an accusation he never deserved. Inside the HOA conference room, the air smelled of stale coffee and freshly printed agendas. Neighbors murmured at the long table, their faces a blur of curiosity and judgment. At the head of the table sat Ron Tiller, president and reluctant judge. He tapped a stack of papers and looked up as we entered. "Mr. Monroe," he said, voice polite but wary. "You may respond." I set the binder on the table and opened it, revealing its organized contents, screenshot after screenshot of Cora requesting yard work, timestamped photos of Malik carrying equipment, text messages confirming dates, and Ring camera footage capturing every respectful knock at her door. I watched the room go quiet, the only sound the soft click of my binder closing between sections. I stood and clicked my laptop to project the Ring footage onto the wall. There was Malik, standing beside his mower at dawn's first light, smiling shyly as Cora pointed to the flower bed. Next, the timestamp showed him wiping sweat from his brow after finishing the path between the roses. Finally, the clip where she uttered the words I still tasted like bile. "You people always want something." I paused the video on her face, crinkled lips, narrowed eyes. The room remained silent, tension pulsing like a live wire. I heard my own breath, steady but charged. I closed the laptop and met each neighbor's eyes in turn. "My son has done nothing but offer help," I said, voice steady. "He volunteered, out of respect. He never asked for payment. He never stepped off the concrete without permission. But yesterday, he was told he was not part of this family, not real." The words hung, heavy as iron. I let the silence stretch until someone shuffled papers. Then I added, "This complaint is not about safety. It is about prejudice. It is about fear of change." I sat, chest tight, and watched as the binder passed from hand to hand, pink-faced neighbors reading, mouths tightening. An hour later, Ron cleared his throat. "We will deliberate," he said, voice softer than before. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe." We gathered our things and left without another word. Outside, The air felt cooler, as if the building exhaled relief. Malik walked beside me, shoulders still stiff but eyes brighter. I kept my arm around him, guiding him back to the car. "You did the right thing," I said. He nodded again, slower this time, and inhaled deep. Back home, we sat on the back porch where the grass rolled out like a green ocean. Malik pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled absently. "Nobody saw her side?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Everyone saw your side for once." He let out a breath, and I thought I saw a flicker of a grin. "Thanks, Dad," he said, voice lighter. The cicadas buzzed above us, as though acknowledging a small victory in their endless song. That evening, after the sun dipped behind the pines and the sky deepened to indigo, I found myself lying awake, replaying the day. I visualized every angle of the conference room, the way Cora's snub had echoed louder than her accusation. I felt pride in my son's dignity, fierce enough to shield him from old wounds. And I allowed myself a sliver of hope, that the next knock on the door would carry respect instead of malice, because sometimes standing up for someone you love changes the world, one quiet act at a time. The HOA meeting room smelled of stale coffee and institutional varnish, the kind of place where polite grudges are aired under fluorescent lights. I sat in the back row, arms crossed over my chest, heart pounding like a trapped drum. Malik sat beside me, shoulders squared but eyes flicking toward the door each time it opened. At the head of the long rectangular table, Ron Tiller cleared his throat and peered over his reading glasses at the assembled board members and neighbors. Murmurs rippled through the room: curiosity, judgment, anticipation. This was the moment I had been both dreading and preparing for since receiving Cora's formal complaint. Her claim that Malik had harassed her and made her feel unsafe was a lie tethered to prejudice, and I was determined to expose the truth. When Ron called the meeting to order, he spoke in measured tones. "Thank you all for attending. We are here to address the complaint filed by Mrs. Cora Langford against Mr. Malik Monroe." He glanced at me, then continued, "Mr. Monroe, you may present your evidence." I rose, clutching a slim folder the color of midnight, its pages heavy with proof. The room fell quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner struggling against the summer heat. I walked to the table's center, each step measured, as though marking territory. I arranged the folder in front of Ron, then turned to face everyone, Malik's steady presence at my back giving me courage. "I'd like to start with the timeline," I began, my voice clear in the hush. On June 10th at 7:15 a.m., Malik arrived at Mrs. Langford's residence, as he has each week, to mow her lawn. I tapped the folder. "Here is a timestamped text message from Mrs. Langford's phone, sent to my number at 7:20 a.m., confirming the arrangement." I handed out printed copies, a screenshot of Cora's words, "Thank you for coming early," glowing bright against the black interface. Next, I lifted a stack of photographs, Malik pushing the mower along the driveway's edge, cap pulled low to shield his eyes from the sun. The images were sharp. Sweat beading on his forehead, the mower's metal deck gleaming, the fragile blooms of Cora's rose garden still standing tall. The board members leaned forward. I felt their gaze sharpen. "Then," I said, "we have Ring camera footage from June 24th at 1:02 p.m., when Mrs. Langford accused Malik of harassment." I pressed a button on my laptop, and the video flickered to life on the projection screen. There was Malik, standing at Cora's front porch, lawnmower idling behind him. His posture was deferential, hands clasped behind his back, head bowed slightly. I replayed the moment. Cora's voice, crisp and disdainful, pierced the quiet. "You people always want something. You're not my real grandson." The echo of her words filled the room, followed by the shudder of Malik's shoulders as he took a breath and nodded, stepping back to let her pass. The silence that followed her exit was weighty, like the space between notes in a funeral march. I paused the video on Cora's face. Her eyes narrowed, the corners of her mouth tight. I turned off the projector and closed my laptop. "That is what happened," I said. "Not harassment, not threats. A respectful volunteer, told he did not belong, and then accused of wrong for standing politely on a porch." My voice carried an undercurrent of restrained anger that made a few neighbors shift uncomfortably in their seats. I opened the folder again, revealing transcripts of neighborhood complaints Cora had filed over the past 5 years, against the Patels on Cedar Bend, the Morales family by Maple Drive, the Chin siblings 2 houses down. Each complaint was identical in tone and tenor, vague claims of feeling unsafe, demands that outsiders be restricted. I passed these documents around. Here is a pattern, I said. A history of weaponizing the HOA against anyone who doesn't look or live like her. Heads nodded, some in sympathy, some in dawning recognition. I felt Malik's hand brush mine under the table, a silent thank you. I swallowed and pressed on. Finally, I said, pulling out a printed screenshot of Cora's comment from the community Facebook group. This neighborhood needs people who respect our values. Keep it clean. The post sat amid a sea of celebratory posts for yard awards and block parties, as if her hatred was just another civic duty. I let that sink in. These are not isolated incidents. They are the backbone of her complaint against my son. A murmur swept the room, voices rising like wind before a storm. One board member adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Monroe," he said, "this is extensive." Ron's eyes were bright. "Indeed." I nodded, closing the folder for the final time. "I trust you will see that this is not a matter of safety, but of discrimination. I ask that the board dismiss this complaint and take appropriate action to protect our community from such misuse of our rules." Ron looked down at his notes, then raised his head. "Thank you, Grayson. The board will deliberate privately and issue a decision by the end of the week." It felt like a victory merely to stand there, having laid every card on the table. I returned to my seat next to Malik, who met my gaze with pride shining in his eyes in a way that made my chest tighten. He offered a small, tentative smile, the first one I'd seen since Cora's words hit him. As we left the meeting room, neighbors approached us, some with apologies, some with support, others simply nodding gravely. In the parking lot, Malik wrapped his arms around me in a rare embrace, and I held him tight, listening to the soft thunk of his head against my shoulder. "Thank you, Dad," he whispered. "You showed them my story." I kissed the top of his head. "Always," I replied. "Always." That night, I lay in bed replaying every detail of the meeting. I thought of how evidence had drowned out lies, how truth still mattered in a world quick to judge. And I believed, with a quiet certainty, that we had taken the first step toward justice. Malik would sleep more easily now, and tomorrow the grass would still be green, because finally, the truth had been given room to grow. I thought that would be the end, the complaint dismissed, the whispers quelled, and the fragile peace of our neighborhood restored. But 2 days after the HOA meeting, Malik's car sat in our driveway like a wounded animal, its driver's side windows smeared with yolk yellow splatters and both tires on that side deflated into sad, soft crescents. I pulled into the cul-de-sac just before dawn, the street empty except for the soft hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of early traffic. The street lamp's halo glowed over Malik's midnight blue sedan, now streaked with white and yellow and slashes of deflated promise. I approached slowly, every footstep weighted by dread. The eggshells lay scattered across the pavement. Memories of breakfast turned into weapons, and the shredded rubber hung like limp streamers. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure someone across the street would hear. I snapped photos with my phone. Close-ups of the shell fragments stuck to the windshield, the jagged edges of the slashed tires, the faded scrawl in black marker on the passenger door, "Not family." The message was clear: stay away. My mind raced back to the man I'd seen hugging Cora on her porch a week earlier. He had the same build, mid-30s, broad shoulders, a baseball cap pulled low, but I dismissed him then as just another neighbor offering comfort. Now I realized that his embrace might have been a warning, a signal that the Langford family's reach extended beyond polite HOA letters and into the realm of intimidation. I called the police and waited on the hood of my car, lights flashing red and blue in my rearview mirror, until 2 officers arrived. They took my statement with polite detachment, capturing my name, Malik's name, the make and model of the car, and the crude note scribbled on the passenger door. "Looks like a hate crime," one officer muttered under his breath, but no hate crime unit was dispatched. The report number was half-heartedly filed, and the officers promised someone would follow up, though their shoulders sagged under the weight of unspoken skepticism. I thanked them, but even as they drove away, confidence drained from me like air escaping the tires on that wounded car. Inside the house, I found Malik in his room, pacing the floorboards like a caged lion. When I asked if he was all right, his eyes were red-rimmed. "B." He helped me lift the car's rear and drag it into the garage so the egg residue wouldn't attract bees. Then he tore off to school without another word. I watched him go, the lines of his face drawn tight with hurt and anger. I wanted to promise him safe passage, but the world beyond our driveway had already shown its claws. Instead, I sank into my chair and vowed to myself that I would not let fear become our master. That afternoon, I combed through neighborhood watch posts and community group chats, hunting for clues. A neighbor 2 streets over had posted about hearing a vehicle speeding away late at night. Another had captured a blurry license plate trailing from a Ring camera on a fence post. I downloaded the footage and enhanced it on my computer, grainy, but enough to reveal a pickup truck with a rusted tailgate and a sticker that read, Langford Family Reunion 1998. My blood ran cold. The reunion had taken place before my divorce, back when Delilah still believed family was defined by blood and last names. Now that same legacy of exclusion had followed us into our lives. I printed the images and compiled a new binder, this one heavier, its spine aching under the weight of evidence. I included the school video stills, the Ring upload showing the tailgate sticker, and the police report noting the hate crime suspicion. I underscored the pattern: petty HOA complaints, veiled prejudices, and now a violent escalation. Then I called the detective assigned to our case and left a message with the file for an investigator who cared to listen. I didn't expect miracles, but I needed a record that would stand between us and the darkness. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with Malik and his mother's old china, delicate cups that seemed to mock our hardened nerves. He pushed peas around his plate, eyes distant. I placed a copy of the new binder beside his water glass and rested my hand over it. I know it's getting worse, I said quietly, but I'm not going to let them win. He looked at me, skepticism and gratitude warring behind his gaze. He reached out and touched the binder, as if testing its solidity. They can't stop us, he said, voice small but resolute. In that moment, I realized that our bond, forged in hardship, had become our armor. Over the next few days, I installed additional security cameras at the corners of our property, wide-angle lenses hidden among the hedges, infrared sensors mounted beneath eaves. I learned wiring diagrams and motion detection settings, becoming an amateur sentinel in a silent war. I watched footage in real time, my finger always on the pause button, ready to capture any movement that traced the edges of our yard. Malik joined me on weekend patrols, grabbing ice-cold lemonade from the fridge and pressing play on each new clip. We laughed over false alarms, squirrels darting through the lilies, the neighbor's cat prowling beneath hedges, and found solace in our shared vigilance. One night, as we reviewed footage from a camera near the mailbox, we saw a figure step into view, thin, hooded, moving carefully past the porch light's glow. He paused at the mailbox, pulled something from his pocket, and then ripped the entire box off the post. The image was blurry, but the outline of the man's profile, the curve of his shoulders, was unmistakable. He moved with the same determined gait as the pickup truck driver. I froze the frame, zoomed in, and stared at the silhouette, committing every detail to memory. Then I took a deep breath, turned to Malik, and whispered, "This ends soon." We reported the latest incident to the detective, sending him the video as an attachment with a timestamp. I didn't know if it would spur an arrest, but I needed to document our ordeal in a way that could not be ignored. Late that night, as the cicadas sang their mournful lullaby, I watched the southern sky through my bedroom window, searching for stars. I thought of Delilah and wondered if she recognized the neighborhood she left behind, now war-torn by prejudice. I thought of Malik, his resilience and kindness, and vowed that whatever came next, we would face it together. In the darkness, I found a strange kind of clarity, that this fight was no longer about mowing lawns or HOA votes. It was about claiming space in a world that had tried to erase us. It was about teaching my son that courage is nurtured in moments of fear, and that standing up for yourself is sometimes the only way to stand tall. And as I turned off the light and slipped beneath the covers, I knew that tomorrow we would carry our armor back out into the sun. Because in the face of shells and slashes, we would not be silenced. The days after the tire slashing incident felt like walking through a fog that refused to lift. I watched Malik retreat into himself, his laughter vanishing like a songbird at dusk. He no longer greeted me at the door with the same bright confidence. Instead, he moved through the house with quiet steps, as though trying not to disturb the shadows. Our kitchen table, once a place of easy conversation, became a stage for strained silence. Plates clinked, forks tapped against porcelain, but the words we needed, the words that might heal, remained unsaid, hanging in the air like unanswered invitations. One evening, I found him sitting alone on the back porch, the sky bruised with sunset and cicadas humming their nightly hymn. He stared at the lawn, its stripes now a battlefield of memories. I slid onto the bench beside him, careful not to startle him. The wooden slats creaked, a familiar groan that once felt comforting, now sounded like the house itself whispering its concern. I waited, offering only my presence until he finally spoke, voice low and brittle. "I worked all summer, Dad," he said, eyes fixed on the grass. "I mowed houses, watered gardens, didn't ask for a thing. And now they think I'm a threat." He exhaled, a gust of weariness that carried the weight of childish dreams turned to dust. "How is that fair?" I swallowed hard, wanting to offer solace, but knowing words alone weren't enough. Instead, I reached for his hand, warm and trembling. "It's not fair," I said simply. "But you did the right thing. You helped when no one else would." He turned his head just enough to meet my gaze, those dark eyes flickering with doubt and defiance. "Helped who?" he asked. "People who hate me for who I am." His voice cracked, and for the first time I saw the depth of his hurt. It wasn't just bruised tires or angry notes. It was the realization that kindness could be repaid with cruelty. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling fan spinning overhead, each slat slicing through my thoughts. I remembered the first time Malik volunteered, shy grin, shy wave of his hand, and how proud I'd felt. I remembered Delilah teaching him to plant flowers and nurture them, her gentle hands guiding his. But these memories felt distant now, rooted in a past life. I knew I had to act, not just for Malik's sake, but for our family's dignity. So, before dawn broke, I grabbed a notebook and scrawled a list of neighbors to speak with: the Patels, the Morales, the Chin family, the Rodriguezes on Maple Drive. Anyone who'd encountered Cora's venomous HOA complaints or experienced her prejudice firsthand. Armed with coffee and determination, I set out that morning on what I privately called my truth tour. My first stop was the Patel residence. Mr. Patel invited me inside, offering warm laughter and chai-spiced aromas. In his living room, he showed me a letter from Cora complaining they left the garden hose running too long, insinuating outsiders were irresponsible. He rolled his eyes and shook his head. "We keep records of our irrigation schedules," he said. "She accused us of negligence." I noted the date, the wording, the petty cruelty. He leaned forward, voice sincere. "We told the HOA how she targeted us, but nothing changed." I thanked him and carried the evidence to my car, feeling the record thickening in my hands. Next, I visited the Morales family. Senora Morales invited me into her sunlit kitchen and offered empanadas still warm from the oven. She spoke of a complaint that the children's bilingual play had disturbed Cora's tranquility. I watched as her lips tightened with memory, describing how the HOA dismissed her concerns. "They told me to keep my culture to myself," she said softly. Each testimony etched itself into my notebook. Dates, descriptions, the undercurrent of discrimination. I scribbled until the pages blurred, refusing to let a single detail slip away. By midday, I was at the Chin household. Mrs. Chin, grandmotherly and fierce, recounted Cora's demand that her grandchildren wear gloves to pick roses, preserving her prized blooms, and then lodging a complaint when a single petal fell onto the sidewalk. "She watched us like hawks," Mrs. Chin said, pouring tea. "And then she used the HOA as her weapon." I offered my gratitude and promised to compile everything into a binder worthy of scrutiny. Back home, I sorted through the growing pile of testimonies and police records, my living room table buried beneath stacks of paper. I printed the snippet from the community board meeting where Cora had defiantly declared, "This neighborhood must maintain its character," the words laced with unspoken consequence. That clip, time-stamped and dated, spoke volumes. Character, in her mind, meant exclusion. I color-coded each piece of evidence, yellow for letters, blue for photographs, red for video stills, and organized them into a new, heavier binder than any I'd held before. Late that afternoon, I called Malik into my home office, walls lined with books and framed photos of better days. I closed the door, ensuring privacy, then gestured for him to sit. His posture was guarded, but he obeyed. On the desk between us lay the binder, its spine straining like the bow of a violin under tension. I opened it to the first page, revealing Mrs. Patel's letter, then flipped to the Morales testimony, then the Chin's complaint. I watched his expression shift from wariness to astonishment as he absorbed the scope of Cora's years-long campaign of intimidation. "I had no idea," he said, voice small. "I thought it was just me." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It wasn't just you," I said, voice gentle but firm. "She spread this fear across every house that didn't matter to her. But now we have proof." I flipped to the community board screenshot and enlarged the quote on the screen behind me. "This was her voice," I said. Bold, public, unashamed. Malik leaned forward, reading the words, "Neighbors must maintain character." I saw resolve kindle in his eyes, the spark I'd feared extinguished now flickering again. We spent the rest of the evening adding context to each piece of evidence. Dates, locations, names of board members, HOA policy references. By the time darkness settled outside, our pages were complete, comprehensive, and irrefutable. Malik closed the binder with a satisfied snap, the sound echoing like a final chord. "We're ready," he said, and I felt a surge of pride stronger than any I'd known. In the quiet that followed, we sat side by side on the couch, the binder resting on our laps like an atlas of justice. Neither of us spoke for a long while. Then Malik exhaled, the tension leaking from him like air from a punctured tire. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up." I wrapped my arm around him, pulling him into a side hug. "We're in this together," I replied, knowing that though we hadn't spoken all the things we should have said before, sometimes actions speak louder than words. And as I held my son through the night, listening to the soft rhythm of his breath, I felt certain that our silence had been shattered, not by Cora's hate, but by our determination to stand up, speak out, and reclaim the story of who we were. For in the end, the things we don't say aloud can shape us just as profoundly as the words we choose to voice, and we had chosen truth. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in soft stripes, illuminating the edges of every paper stacked on my desk. I tapped my pen against the desktop, watching the binders I'd assembled, 5 fat volumes thick with testimony, timestamps, photographs, and transcripts. Each binder represented a piece of our story: the polite invitations from Cora before her accusations, the time-stamped images of Malik mowing her lawn, the snapshots of eggshell fragments strewn across his car, and the ring footage of the anonymous figure ripping our mailbox from its post. Today was the special HOA hearing, and I felt the weight of those binders like a shield strapped to my spine. Our future hinged on their contents. I called Malik into my study just before breakfast. He stood in the doorway, eyes flicking over the bulging binders, shoulders tense but determined. He looked 19 here, no longer the eager boy who'd once pushed a mower across these lawns, but a young man tempered by prejudice and resolve. I gestured him inside and closed the door behind him. "I want you to know everything in here belongs to you," I said quietly, nudging the nearest binder toward him. "Your story, your truth." He ran a finger along the binder's spine, then looked at me, gratitude and anger warring in his eyes. "I'm ready," he said. I loaded the binders into the car, securing each one so it wouldn't shift during the drive. I checked my watch. Precisely 8:45 a.m. We were scheduled for 10 o'clock, which meant time to rehearse. On the drive to the clubhouse, I reviewed the hearing format in my head. Each party would present evidence, followed by brief questions, then the board would deliberate. I pictured Ron's steely gaze, the board's murmur behind their papers, and Cora's smug expression when she realized the floor belonged to us. I felt Malik's hand brush against mine, a silent affirmation that he shared my anticipation. At the clubhouse door, neighbors clustered in hushed groups, faces inscrutable. Some offered sympathetic nods, others glanced away, unwilling to choose sides publicly. I led Malik inside, ignoring the stale odor of buffed floors and recycled air. We took our seats at a long table, 5 binders spread before me like ancient tomes. Across the table sat Cora Langford, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a hard line. She clutched her own thin folder, one likely filled with distortions. Her eyes flicked toward me, cold as a winter morning. I forced myself not to flinch. When Ron called the hearing to order, he spoke with professional calm. "We are here to review the special complaint and counter-evidence presented by Mr. and Mr. Monroe and Mrs. Langford." He turned to me. "Mr. Monroe, you may begin." I took a breath, feeling Malik's steady presence at my side, and opened the first binder to a section I'd tabbed in bright yellow. "Thank you, Ron," I said. "I'd like to start with a pattern of behavior." I distributed copies of the HOA minutes from meetings over the past 5 years, highlighting 24 entries where Cora had lodged unfounded complaints against families of color, each entry dismissed by the board but never addressed conclusively. "These records," I explained, "demonstrate a consistent misuse of HOA authority to harass families who differ from her preferred neighborhood image." I watched board members' brows knit together as they scanned the pages. I moved to the next binder where I'd placed the photographs from June 10th through June 24th, images of Malik performing yard work with polite deference. "Here, you see my son volunteering," I said, sliding a folder of time-stamped texts across the table. Yes, Malik, please come tomorrow morning. Thank you so much. Then the ring footage screenshot where Cora spat her cruelty. You people always want something. I paused, locking eyes with Cora. This is not safety enforcement. This is prejudice. The room grew quiet, the air thick with unspoken truths. Turning to the final binder, I presented the evidence of escalation. The vandalized car, the slashed tires, the torn mailbox. I passed along video stills of the pickup truck with the Langford Family Reunion 1998 sticker, then the police reports noting hate crime suspicions. When verbal intimidation failed, they resorted to property damage, I said. And yet, our local authorities haven't intervened. We're here because our community must uphold its standards for everyone, no exceptions. I closed the binder decisively and let the gravity of those words hang. Cora stood next, her voice quavering as she attempted to recast her complaint as a matter of personal safety rather than bias. Questions from board members were polite but probing. One asked about the legal ownership of the mailbox. I offered the deed. Another inquired whether I had solutions for community unity. I suggested bias training and equitable complaint processes. When it was Malik's turn, he spoke with measured strength. I only wanted to help, he said, voice steady. But the people who taught me kindness turned it back on me as poison. He paused, and I saw tears glimmer at the corners of his eyes. I deserved to be treated like anyone else's grandson. After closing remarks, Ron adjourned the hearing and excused everyone while the board deliberated. The waiting room felt cavernous as neighbors shifted in their seats. Reporters from the local news chattered softly, and Cora huffed indignantly beside her nephew, Martin. Malik sank into a chair beside me, the binders now silent witnesses to our struggle. I placed my hand on his shoulder. No matter what happens, I said, I'm proud of you. He nodded, head bent, and I felt pride swell like a sunrise. An hour later, Ron reopened the meeting. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate. After reviewing the evidence, the board has decided to suspend Mrs. Langford's HOA privileges for 1 year. We are also recommending a community-wide review of our complaint procedures. The room exhaled, some in relief, others in applause muted by formality. Cora's face drained of color as she gathered her thin folder, her departure a hasty retreat. We rose as well, and Malik and I exited into bright daylight, the binders now empty vessels of purpose fulfilled. Outside, the sun felt warmer, the cicadas louder, as though celebrating our victory. Neighbors emerged, offering congratulations and handshakes. Malik looked at me and smiled, limited but genuine, the smile I'd longed to see. I lifted a binder overhead like a trophy and set it on the grass, letting the pages flutter in the breeze. We did it, he said softly. Together. I pulled him close, inhaling the scent of fresh-cut grass and possibility. As we walked back down the driveway, I knew the battle wasn't over. Prejudice could lurk in many shadows, but in that moment, armed with truth and fortified by love, we had carved out a space where justice could grow. When Martin Langford, Cora's son and my former brother-in-law, appeared on my doorstep, the late afternoon light slanted across his face like an accusation. He stood there with the same muscular arms I remembered from family reunions, arms that once lifted my son high so Cora could coo over him as her real grandson. Now that fierce familiarity twisted into something ugly. You're making a fool of this family, he snapped, voice low and gravelly. She's just an old lady. This is petty. Stop dragging our name through the dirt. I felt a rush of heat pool in my belly, anger, disbelief, sorrow. But I kept my voice steady. She called my son, not real. She smeared him with slurs. He's human, Martin. Doesn't deserve what she's done. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might strike me. Instead, he leaned in, tone even more threatening. You don't want to start a war you can't win. He turned on his heel and stalked back down the driveway, leaving me with the echo of his footsteps and a silent promise. We weren't done. That night, I installed additional security cameras, 3 more discreet lenses hidden in the hedges lining the property, one above the garage door, another beneath the porch light, and the last inside the mailbox itself. I watched the digital feeds flicker to life on my monitor and studied each angle until I knew every shadow and every brick. My hands moved with a methodical calm, but inside I was a storm. I thought of Malik's laughter before this nightmare began, the bright notes now muted, and I reminded myself we would not allow fear to become our master. 2 nights later, I woke to the dull thunk of metal and the groan of splintering wood. I grabbed my phone and slipped into the hallway, breathing in the cool hallway air. On the security monitor, I saw him. A lone figure beneath the porch light, his face obscured by a baseball cap, his gloved hands prying our mailbox from its post. As I reached for my keys, Malik appeared behind me, silent but resolute, and together we crept down the stairs and out the front door. By the time we reached the scene, the man was gone, the mailbox lying in splinters at my feet. But the camera had captured every detail, the curve of his shoulders, the angle of his movements, the glint of metal tools tucked into his belt. I scooped up the shattered wood and slipped it into a plastic bag, preserving the evidence for the detective. "He tried again," I said, voice tight. Malik nodded, eyes burning with determination. "Then we'll be ready." The next morning, the police knocked on our door with fresh questions, their expressions tinged with newfound urgency. They confiscated the shattered mailbox, asked for the camera footage, and promised that this time they would assign a detective who specialized in property crimes. I handed over the bag of splintered wood and the logs of camera downloads. The younger officer looked at me with sympathy. The veteran simply nodded. "We'll follow every lead," he said. I believed him in that moment because I had hoped that truth held more power than old grudges. In the days that followed, I resolved to confront Martin directly, but on my terms. I left a typed note on his doorstep. "Meet me on Saturday at 3 p.m. at the park across the street." No threats, no lawyers, just words. On Saturday afternoon, I found him leaning against a lamppost, arms folded, hooded sweatshirt concealing tattoos I'd never noticed before. He looked older, harder, as though 13 months of witnessing his mother's humiliation had carved lines into his face. I approached slowly, hands visible. "Thanks for coming," I said. He snorted. "You have nothing to say." I shook my head. "I want to understand." He regarded me warily. "Understand what? That my family's perfect image was shattered? That you want to drag us in the mud?" I exhaled, letting the summer breeze carry away some of my tension. Cora's actions go beyond HOA rules. Harassment, property damage, it's a pattern of hate. It's bigger than our families. He spat on the sidewalk. "Hate? You think she hates you?" I met his gaze, calm but firm. "She hates what she doesn't understand. But that doesn't give her the right to threaten my son." His jaw twitched. "He shouldn't have come poking around." I nodded. He volunteered to help someone who treated him like trash. And I don't apologize for standing by him. He stared for a long moment, as though weighing my words against some inner code. Then he turned away. "Stay out of Langford business," he muttered. I wanted to argue, to chase after him, but I held my ground. "I will," I said softly. "If you stop targeting us." The wind carried my words to him, and for a flicker of time, I thought he might reconsider. But he stalked off, leaving me beneath the lamppost with my unanswered plea. That night, I reviewed every frame of the mailbox footage, zooming in on the glove seams, the distortion of the hat embroidered with a discreet logo. I compared it to the license plate snapshot from Malik's /tires. The plate number matched the pickup truck, and the logo was the same on the hat worn by that driver. It all pointed back to Cora's nephew. My chest tightened with vindication. I compiled a folder of these images, labeling it Martin Langford, evidence of escalation, and sent it to the detective with a succinct message, attached as documentation connecting previous incidents to a single individual. Please advise on next steps. By midweek, I received a call. The detective wanted a formal statement, and they were preparing to execute a search warrant for Martin's residence and the truck. He urged me to stay vigilant and to collect any additional data points, times, dates, witness accounts. I scheduled a neighborhood watch meeting that Thursday evening, inviting neighbors to share any unusual observations. 7 families attended, including one who reported seeing a rusted pickup circling the cul-de-sac at 2:30 a.m. twice in the last week. Another family supplied a photograph of the truck parked near the community center on a day Cora hosted a book club. The dossier grew, and I felt the momentum shifting in our favor. The isolated acts of vandalism were now recognized as orchestrated threats by law enforcement. That weekend, Martin's truck was towed away, and I watched from my porch as uniformed officers loaded evidence into bags. His mother, Cora, arrived in a used minivan, her face ashen as she watched them haul her son's truck onto the flatbed. She clutched her thin black folder, the same one that had been a weapon against us, now useless in the face of criminal charges. Our eyes met across the street, and I saw fear there, a recognition that her fortress of prejudice had been breached by indisputable proof. I closed the door gently and turned to Malik, who stood beside me, arms crossed but relief etched into his features. They found the link, I said. He exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. That's all I needed, he replied. Together, we watched Cora retreat to her minivan, Martin's fate sealed by blood and paper fences alike. In the days that followed, the HOA issued a formal apology to Malik and to every family Cora had targeted. They announced a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and established a review board with rotating membership. Our cul-de-sac felt lighter, as though removing the poison from the soil had revived the blooms. Neighbors waved as I mowed the lawn, and Malik returned to volunteering, his stride unburdened. One evening, I found him at the front porch, his hands on the mower's handles, humming softly to himself. I stepped outside and stood beside him, inhaling the scent of fresh grass. He looked up, met my gaze, and smiled. Not the tentative smile of someone reclaiming his joy, but the radiant one of a young man who knew he belonged. I returned his smile, my heart full, and together we finished the last pass of the lawn, the battle won. But the lesson clear: in the face of hate, truth and perseverance build fences stronger than any paper complaint. When Ron called me on the phone, his voice was measured, as though he were offering condolences instead of good news. Grayson, the board vote is tomorrow morning. I closed my laptop and felt the binders on my desk tremble, as though they too sensed the gravity of the moment. Malik stood behind me, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes shining with cautious hope. This is it, I said, though my throat felt tight. He nodded, then tapped a finger on his phone screen. I'll send it now, he said, refreshing his email for the 5th time. Together, we pressed send on the folder I'd compiled, the entire record of Cora's discrimination, the vandalism footage, the police reports, the testimonials from every family she'd targeted. We addressed it to the local news desk with a straightforward subject line: Suburban teen harassed by HOA ex-grandmother, proof enclosed. By afternoon, my phone buzzed with the first response, a reporter from the Triangle Times, asking for a sit-down interview. Within an hour, another email arrived from Carolina Tonight, the local evening news. In our quiet cul-de-sac, we watched as our phones pinged with notifications and our inboxes filled with invitations to share our story. Malik paced the living room, replaying the awkward discomfort of sitting across from news cameras earlier that day. I never wanted my story told, he muttered, tugging at his collar. I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. This isn't about you wanting attention, I said. It's about showing the world what happens when prejudice goes unchecked. He exhaled slowly, shoulders squaring. The next morning, we arrived at the community center before sunrise. Reporters clustered by the front doors, tripods already set, cameras pointed toward the entrance like vulture sentinels. Neighbors trickled in, offering supportive nods and thumbs-up gestures. I recognized Mrs. Patel, her daughter beside her, both wearing T-shirts emblazoned with Malik's name. The Morales family waved from a distance, and the Chins stood behind them, scarves tied neatly over their shoulders. When Ron stepped to the podium, the chatter dimmed to a respectful hush. He cleared his throat and announced, "We are here to vote on suspending Mrs. Cora Langford's HOA privileges for 1 year, effective immediately." My pulse hammered so loudly I thought it would choke out the rest of his sentence. Board members passed ballots down the long table. Each vote clack felt like a bullet fired at injustice. I watched Cora's empty chair across the room, the thin folder she once clutched now gone. The reader beside me paused, reading off a count. 4 in favor, 1 opposed. A ripple of relief spread through the crowd. Someone clapped, quietly at first, then others joined until polite applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed and microphones thrust forward. Reporters hustled toward me and Malik, eager for sound bites. I swallowed and stepped forward, hugging Malik's hand before releasing it to raise my own in a tentative salute. "Thank you," I said, voice catching. "This isn't vengeance. It's justice." Our interview aired that evening on Carolina Tonight. I sat beside Malik in our living room, watching the segment unfold on screen. Footage of ring cameras, the binders being passed around at the HOA meeting, my voice explaining the misuse of privilege. Malik's polite smile appeared as the anchor introduced him, a 17-year-old student volunteer turned evidence gatherer. We held hands when the story ended, the glow of the television flickering across our faces. Social media ignited. Within hours, we saw comments on neighborhood forums, congratulatory notes on Malik's college application portal, and strangers donating to a GoFundMe for Malik's future scholarship. I scrolled through the messages, tears prickling my eyes at every word of support. Over the next 2 days, our story went national. News outlets syndicated the piece. Teen volunteer harassed by ex-grandmother. Fights back with evidence. Headlines splashed across websites and social feeds. College admissions boards reached out with inquiries, one offering Malik a provisional scholarship interview. A local nonprofit invited us to speak at their diversity summit. Every time my phone buzzed, I hesitated before reading, bracing myself for another wave of injustice, only to find hope renewed. I realized that our fight had become bigger than our driveway and our lawn. It had become a testament to standing up when no one else would. The morning after the vote, I woke to find a message on my answering machine. This is Ron Tiller. On behalf of the HOA board, I want to apologize for the pain caused and to invite you both to help us craft a community outreach program. I returned his call and accepted, feeling the full circle of accountability unfolding. Later, as I walked Malik to the bus stop, neighbors greeted us with smiles and waves. Even the elderly couple at the corner who seldom spoke now tipped their hat. Malik turned to me and said, "Dad, do you think things will really change?" I looked down at him, his chin lifted, his sneakers scuffed but his heart unbroken, and replied, "I know they will." The street felt alive beneath our feet, every blade of grass a promise that, in the face of prejudice, the vote of truth and the spotlight of justice could illuminate even the darkest lawns. The morning after the vote, the air felt different, as though the cul-de-sac itself exhaled relief. Malik bounded down the steps ahead of me, his backpack slung loosely, the glint of possibility in his eyes. I followed, carrying the mower to the front yard, noting how the grass seemed greener somehow, as if nourished by vindication. Neighbors paused in their own routines, Mrs. Patel watering her hibiscus, the Rodriguezes checking their mail, and offered genuine smiles in our direction. Even the Morales family waved, their little daughter's grin reminding me that innocence persists when hope is nurtured. By midday, my phone rang. The Thurgood Scholars Program inviting Malik for an interview, a full scholarship hanging in the balance. I listened with mounting pride as Malik answered, voice confident, listing his volunteer projects and academic achievements without hesitation. When he hung up, he turned to me, eyes wide. "I got it," he breathed. "Everything full ride, housing, books." I felt tears sting as I clasped his shoulders. "You earned this," I said, voice thick. "They saw who you truly are." That afternoon, I repaired the last stripe on the lawn, pushing the mower methodically, each pass a reminder of endurance and renewal. The clouds gathered in soft clusters, promising rain, and I welcomed their approach, water for the grass, for new growth, for the healing we'd begun. In the distance, my phone buzzed again. An email from our local news producer, asking if Malik would participate in a panel on youth activism. He agreed without hesitation, eager to share his story and encourage others to stand up. As evening fell, I stepped onto the porch with a pitcher of iced tea and watched Malik host his first livestream Q&A, fielding questions about gathering evidence, confronting prejudice, and finding strength in community. His voice was steady, compassionate, and humble. I recognized in him the same determination I'd seen on the day he first knocked on Cora's door. Viewers sent messages of support and stories of similar struggles, transforming our private battle into a catalyst for broader change. Later, when the ceremony invitation arrived, an official HOA event to celebrate neighborhood unity, I hesitated. Would I attend? That place where so much of our pain originated? Malik looked at me, hope bright in his eyes. "We should," he said. "They need to see the real us." So we went together, arriving to applause rather than whispers. Ron presented Malik with a certificate recognizing his leadership, and the crowd cheered. Cora was absent, of course, having sold her house and moved on, but her departure felt less like defeat and more like the purging of a blight. Walking home under the soft glow of street lamps, I felt Malik's hand slip into mine. "Dad," he said quietly, "thank you for never giving up." I squeezed his fingers and looked at the rebuilt mailbox at the curb, painted fresh white with Monroe stenciled in dark green. "We did this," I replied, heart full. "Together." In the aftermath of scorn and sabotage, what grew was more than grass. It was a community reborn, a bond reinforced, and the knowledge that from fire and conflict, new life can flourish. Weeks after the HOA's apology and Malik's scholarship news, the cul-de-sac settled into an easy rhythm of neighborly greetings and shared chores. Mornings began with the hum of lawnmowers and the scent of fresh coffee drifting through open windows. Even the cicadas seemed more cooperative, their song a gentle backdrop rather than a shrill warning. On a bright Saturday, Malik and I stood before our front yard, Once the battleground of prejudice, now a testament to resilience. I handed Malik a hose spigot wrench, and he knelt to open the valve, letting clear water flood the sprinkler. He adjusted its arc so every blade of grass in the main lawn received a drink. "Perfect," he said, stepping back to admire the spray. I loaded garden tools into a wheelbarrow, shears, pruners, a bag of fertilizer. We set to work trimming hedges along the driveway, once carefully maintained by Cora, now ours to shape as we pleased. As we clipped stray branches, neighbors paused on their porches, offering thumbs up or calling out thanks for our community service. The transformation of this lawn, they said, inspired them to repair their own. Between snips and sprays, Malik recounted the latest panel invitation, a statewide youth leadership conference where he'd speak about standing up to prejudice. I listened, proud and awed by how far he'd come from that stifling June morning. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and looked at me. "You know," he said, "this used to be about mowing grass. Now it's about growing something better." I nodded, planting a shrub where sidewalk cracks had once split under neglect. "Growth takes effort," I agreed. "But when you nurture the right things, beauty follows." By midday, the sprinkler's reach extended to every corner of our yard, and the grass glistened under the sun, each blade reflecting the water's promise. We spread fresh mulch around the newly trimmed roses that once bore the weight of Cora's demands but now stood free of her shadow. I trimmed spent blooms and encouraged new buds, mindful that progress depends on letting go of what's past. Malik raked the excess mulch into a compost pile, ready to nourish next season's growth. Our neighbor, Mrs. Patel, emerged with lemonade and cookies. She handed us each a glass, the tart sweetness cutting through the heat. "You two did something remarkable," she said, gesturing to the lawn. "You turned hostility into hope." Malik grinned, accepting the glass. "We couldn't have done it without everyone's support." She patted his shoulder, then offered a plate of cookies to me. "Here's to new beginnings," she toasted. I raised my glass, feeling the weight of our journey soften in the summer air. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the green expanse, Malik and I sat on the porch steps, legs dangling over the edge. He swirled the last dregs of lemonade, then turned to me. "Dad, I think this lawn is the best it's ever been." I rested my arm around his shoulders and looked out at the neat stripes of grass, the vibrant roses, the sturdy mailbox bearing our name. "It's worth every drop of water," I said. In the glow of dusk, I realized that this lawn wasn't just grass and soil. It was proof that when we stand together, nourish what's right, and refuse to let hate take root, even the most broken ground can flourish.